Thank you. Before I start my formal presentation, I'm just going to start off with a quick video that's on our website, give you an overview. In our neighborhoods, towns, and cities, children are waiting for a forever home. They now number in the tens of thousands. Family breakdown, poverty, homelessness, the lack of parenting skills, fathers neglecting and abusing mothers and children, the suffocation of community supports, resources, and services. All of these take on new meanings for children across Canada. Why a family came into care and why a child becomes available for adoption. These are important issues that require wisdom and resolve at the social program and policy levels. But for the child who is waiting, they just want a permanency plan now. Who is listening? Who cares?
In a media-saturated world, messages about children and families of adoption abound. Too often, all we hear is a Hollywood spin or a sensational story, and we don't get to the real issues. We need to get beyond the cultural myths and stigmas to what matters. Members of adopted families are now stepping forward to share their stories of success and to give voice to children waiting for their forever family. Why? Because children waiting are just kids, like yours and like mine. And just like all children, they have their ups and downs. And like all children, they dream out loud of becoming mums and dads, sports stars, doctors, plumbers, judges, singers, artists, and professors. Hey, and we also dream of being journalists too.
We become nurses too.
We become project managers.
We're journalists too. We even become one of the youngest persons to speak to a federal House committee studying what's important to kids.
And we become national talk show hosts too.
Today's adoptable children are just kids. Kids who need the lifelong guidance, love, and security that parenting brings. Whether it comes through adoption, kinship, or custom care, children need a permanency plan that's right for them. But right now, children are aging within the system, and some are aging out of the system with no family or community there for them. Siblings want and need to be placed together. Children of various heritages and special needs would love to be matched with families of the same profile. Others just say they want a family of their own. Each child is unique. And where are these headlines?
There are no unwanted children, only unfound homes and communities.
Open your heart, open your home, and change the nation.
And it's time we ask it together, the question about how our communities can engage. Well, not everyone could or would qualify to become an adoptive family. Everyone can own a new perspective about children and youth. You can be part of a growing movement all across Canada of people who are getting informed and engaging on adoption and fostering here at home and the adoption of children internationally. Be courageous and be a blessing, not just for your own kids, but for all kids.
In Canada, it can be as simple as participating in your local family and children's snowsuit or care campaign. Respecting a child's journey, heritage, and right to privacy, why not invite families or children in care to your music programs or clubs? Agencies welcome the participation of families and communities who understand the many ways in which we can all be there for children in care. Give us a call. Your local agency is willing to make that connection.
Should we take the next step and call our local agency to apply to become an adoptive or fostering family?
How can our community connect and engage?
Go ahead and ask it. Connect and engage.
Go ahead and ask it.
Ask it.
Go ahead and ask it.
Ask it.
Ask it.
Ask it.
Go ahead and ask it. Connect and engage.
Go ahead, ask it. You know, the adoption and fostering question for your family or your church community. Connect and engage. Ask it, connect, and engage. Okay, now I'll start my presentation because I'm supposed to start with this announcement that I do not have an affiliation with a pharmaceutical or medical device or communication organization other than the EFC, nor hold any investments in these organizations. I'm not receiving a payment from a commercial interest to do the seminar. I really deeply appreciate the emphasis of the CMDS this retreat on adoption. Excited that it's on the agenda, and wonderful to hear Krish and some of the other workshops. I was in Wendy's workshop yesterday, and I think she's doing it again this afternoon, and talk about it from the perspective of Crisis Pregnancy Care Center and their engagement with women. So I'd encourage you also to take that in. In terms of the Evangelical Fellowship, as you know, we do a variety of things. We're probably best known for our work on law and public policy in Ottawa. We're regularly in the courts. Actually, the last 25 years we've been involved in over 50 court cases, half of those in the Supreme Court. Prostitution, we're on religious freedom a few months ago, and this fall on euthanasia. We're hoping to intervene in a Carter case, as is the CMDS. We also do a lot of primary research on youth and church and faith trends. As a study came out a couple days ago on Bible engagement in Canada. It goes on about EFC and a group of Bible engagement groups, Wycliffe and Scripture Union and Open Doors and Canadian Bible Society and so on Bible reading. We did a survey of 4,500 Canadians and their engagement with Scripture. So you can connect to our website or one of those other websites and find that research. But we're also looking forward, and we're looking at how do we engage churches credibly into the life of Canadian society. And at EFC, we've actually done some polling, and both evangelicals and the rest of the population both think the two largest priorities for the church in Canada, social priorities, should be children, both children in poverty and the exploitation of children sexually, and the other one is caring for the ill and dying. That's what the general population perceives the church should be about in terms of social priorities. And so we wanted to encourage that. So over the next few years, we'll be rolling out more and more suggestions on how churches get involved in youth in Canada, and also care and dying, age, seniors, and so on. So we thought we'd start with the issue of adoption and fostering. It's I know it best, and being an adoptive dad and being part of an adoptive family. And so we had pulled together a number of organizations, and Anna Marie here is from Focus on the Family, and they were involved in some of those initial conversations, and different groups decided to do different things. And so one of the things that we did was develop the Adoption Sunday website to encourage churches just to profile adoption and fostering in the church calendar at some point. My wife and I also just completing a book. It's been delayed a few times, but if you want to put down your name and email address, sign up at the back. It's on Children and Youth Matter. 45 different people, families have been involved in the development of the book. My wife and I are kind of general editors, and it covers, there's essays on portrayals of adoption, a sociological side, legal side, and there's also a series of vignettes and stories about adoptive families and a bit of artwork from adoptive kids, and it's kind of a volume. So if you want to be notified when the book's available, there's a sign-up sheet at the back. And then we also have magazine Faith Today, and a few years ago we launched off on this in 2010. There's a few copies left at the back, about the 30,000 kids in Canada. And I'll start with that. The number, well, let me, there we go. I have to remember to do that. My object here this morning, in the time I have, is to really provide an overview of adoption in Canada. It's that simple, so it'll be like a stone skipping across the water. I'll paint some pictures, and we'll leave some time for conversation after. The thrust, and I think you heard it from Chris yesterday and again this morning particularly, is that often adoption is seen as a fertility issue. And we want to change the frame and let people see it as a social and moral issue that faces all Canadians, particularly us as Christians. In many of the abortion debates, the other side often uses the refrain, every child a wanted child. I wonder if our response back could be a home for every child. This is who I'm missing today. A picture of my family. My wife Tracy, she was supposed to be here with me. She has bronchitis. My throat, and not feeling 100%, but hopefully my throat will last. So pray with me as I through this seminar. But Tracy, and then our two daughters, Lauren and Kate. 30,000 children, that's an estimate. It's hard to know how many kids there are that are adoptable in Canada. As I mentioned earlier in the general session, the budget in 2003, Jim Flaherty, 2013 rather, the budget actually noted to use the term 30,000. That number, it's likely low at this point. Just give some more specific numbers. In Ontario in 2009, there were 9,400 Crown wards. Only 822 were adopted, so less than 10% were adopted in that year. If you go to a website called Canada's Waiting Children, it's actually a website by that name, and you'll see kids from across Canada who are waiting for a home. The number's unclear because there's no federal or national system of gathering the numbers together. Every province counts slightly different. Their reports are released at different times. Their definitions vary. And so there's actually no exact number. I often quip that Wendy's, yes, the fast food chain, has a better idea of what's going on in adoption in Canada than the federal government because Wendy's sponsors the Dave Thomas Foundation. Dave Thomas was an adoptee, and the Dave Thomas Foundation, Wendy's Wonderful Kids, pours a lot of money into adoption and fostering. In Canada, the US, they do a lot of polling and surveying and so on, so they probably have better, more accurate numbers than the Prime Minister's office would have. So if you go to a Wendy's in November, your placemats and everything will talk about Wendy's Wonderful Kids, and they actually have workers on the ground in Canada who are working to try to place hard to adopt kids. I mentioned Chris had mentioned it, so I had talked earlier about the aging out issue. A couple years ago, they had as a focus of the provincial advocate in Ontario. Every province now has an advocate for children and youth. It's something relatively new, but now every province does have one. And they've had a series of hearings on kids in care. And these were actually hosted by and orchestrated by kids who were either had just aged out of the system or about to age out of the system. In Ontario, they did it at their house, their Crown ward, so they considered the Ontario legislature to be their house. And they set it up like a parliamentary committee hearing system, where you had a chair of the committee, you had a researcher and a clerk, and all kids who were about to age out or had just aged out of the system. Most of the witnesses were kids about to age out or had just aged out, a few adults who were working with organizations that work with the kids. And then on both sides where normally you had the opposition parties and the governing parties, MPPs sit, they had invited guests who could not ask a question, who could not comment, but these were deputy ministers and MPPs and other experts in the field there to listen. And it was a compelling couple days of testimony. The report was issued just talking about their issues, because depending on their circumstances, you're 18 years old. On your 18th birthday, you're given a backpack, and you're released from foster care or from the group home you're in, and you're on your own. And usually kids who are Crown wards or have there's been a separation from their biological family for a variety of reasons, and literally they're on their own, and to fare for themselves. We were there, and my wife, on her way to the hearings, I was already in Toronto. She was driving there with our two daughters. They're happy about it. They're going to spend the Saturday with Nana and Granddad. And but our older daughter said, "Mom, why are we going to Toronto?" And she said, "Well, darling, there's a bunch of kids that, don't have a forever home, and they're about to lose some supports that they have, and just want to go as a mom and see what I can do." And she said, "Oh, Mom, you should go give some hugs. You're a good hugger." And so Tracy thought about that, and while she was there, she offered hugs to the kids as she was engaged with them. And one fella she met in the afternoon had aged out the system the year before, was on his own. He was quite pleased because he had figured out where he's going to stay for the next week or so. And he'd heard through the grapevine they're having these hearings, so he thought he'd come to the hearings and see what was going on, because he wanted to figure out how he can help the kids coming through the system. He wasn't concerned about himself, but for those that younger than him. And so my wife said, "You want a hug?" He said, "Sure." And she said, "It's going to be a long, juicy one." He said, "That's okay." So, and while they're embracing, he whispered in her ear and said, "This is the first time I can remember I've been hugged for free." He had some wonderful social workers. He had been in 16 different home settings over his tenure within the system. But again, that someone would care for him who's not paid to be there was significant. The systems are stressed. Saskatchewan, a recent report, there were 626 foster homes. 534 of them had more than 4 foster kids. In Ontario, we recently had a release of the Jeffrey Baldwin inquest, 101 recommendations, calling for better screening, for foster requirements, for supervision, for accountability, for provincial-wide standards, those kind of things. And if you look at the reports of the provincial advocates, or every once in a while a province, because of as a result of an inquest, initiates a special inquiry, and you'll see again the same issues raising over and over again. Need for families, need for foster care, need for better supervision, better oversight, better coordination. In Ontario, those supports extend for a few years, and that was one of the recommendations of the kids aging out of the system, was that could they extend their supports if you're in school particularly, can we extend it from 21 to 25? Because for some kids then they're putting themselves through college, and then partway through their college years, the supports cut out, dental, medical, extra medical, those kind of things. Again, no national oversight, as I mentioned. There's no equivalent of National Health Care Act, right, in governing children. So every province, territory do their own thing. And again, there's no national strategy. The Senate has called for a national child commissioner. Whether the province get together that deal with family services and talk, that doesn't happen, and neither is the federal government, fulfilling its role as being kind of a convener, nor is there any national strategy unfolding. So again, no national counting, no national child commissioner, and then that issue that impacts issues like portability. In some ways, it's more difficult to adopt across provincial lines than it would be to adopt internationally. I heard a story of a woman from New Brunswick who came across a child in Ontario that she wanted to adopt, but for her to adopt that child from Ontario means the Ontario worker has to then travel to New Brunswick to do the home study, and when the child's placed, to make sure the child's faring well, and so the Ontario's not going to pay that. So she ended up moving to Ontario for several months, living in the jurisdiction so that she could adopt and then move back home. But how many families can afford to do that? So again, a lot of need. Krish has done a good job of giving some background. I just want to flag a book I came across recently. It's When Children Became People, The Birth of Childhood and Early Christianity, Bojan Bach. He's a Norwegian. The book was translated into English, not overly well done, but it was a dissertation of his. And it's an interesting study where he looked at the Roman worldview in terms of their attitudes towards children, and compare and contrast that to the unfolding view of Christians in the early life of the church. And again, the Roman worldview, the Greek worldview, the children were potential people. They were kind of future adults until they're accepted in the Roman culture, until the child was accepted by the father as legitimately his. They could be exposed, put out to die. Slavery, sexual exploitation, and so on. Of course, in the Christian worldview, radically different. We're all children of God. We have to be. That whole notion of being born again, become childlike. We only fully understand the kingdom of God if we're like a child. Children are fully human. The killing of children, whether abortion or putting out to be exposed, was rejected by the early church. Sexual exploitation of children, since marriage is the only proper context for sexual expression, sexual exploitation of children became taboo, and on it goes. A parallel book, interesting for this audience, would be a book by Gary Frengren, Oregon State University, published by John Hobson's Press. And it's, I think it's Medicine and Healthcare in the Early Church. And he does somewhat the same thing, a little more academically rigorous, but he looks at the views of disability and disease amongst the Greek and the Roman culture, and then contrasts that with the early Christian view of disease and disability, kind of radically different. And one of his conclusions is that probably wherever a church was planted, in the first couple hundred years of Christianity, after the time of Christ, something like healthcare provision, a hospital, a hospice, a clinic, so quickly emerged. Right? So both with children and with disease and disability, a radically different understanding within a Christian worldview of how we respond, the importance, the value of the people, regardless of their circumstance. And again, we shouldn't be surprised then that when we look at the missionaries we send overseas, and those of you who've gone overseas, what are you involved in? Healthcare, childhood, education, and so on and so on. That's part of our DNA, part of our worldview as Christians. So let me tell a bit of a story, give some background. We're in Ontario, so I'll talk about a guy named John Kelso. He was 22 years old. He was a journalist, worked for a newspaper which later became the Telegram, which then became defunct. But this was the 1870s. And 22 years old, devout follower of Jesus, was involved in a number of projects. So one was a Christmas program for underprivileged kids, where he makes sure that the kids got nice presents for Christmas. Another program was in the summer to take kids from the poorer parts of Toronto and take them on the ferry across to Toronto Island, and to have a day of cake and balloons and games and have some fun. He was concerned about the kind of cruelty to God's creatures. He was concerned about the treatment of animals. Noteworthy in his mind was the horses pulling the trolleys in Toronto, right, at the early streetcar system. And they didn't have proper food or water, and they would be collapsed. Concerned about the 5- and 6-year-old boys who were selling newspapers on the streets of Toronto. And one evening he's walking up Yonge Street going home and came across two kids, about 8 and 6, a brother and a sister, who were begging for a quarter. They said if they didn't get a quarter and come home with a quarter, they'd be beaten by their dad. And he said, okay, where is a safe place of refuge for these kids? It took him 3 hours to figure out where he could put them. He couldn't bring them home. He's a single guy, so where's a family situation? It took him 3 hours to try and figure out where to put these children. So it got him thinking about maybe we need to develop a society that would, you had a debate about yesterday about changing your name, but create a society of citizens, of people in the community who would be about inculcating, reminding people about the value of all of God's creatures and care for creatures, animals and children particularly. And he created the Toronto Humane Society. About 3 or 4 years into the life of Toronto Humane Society, they subdivided it and put the children into the Children's Aid Society, which they created, and the animals stayed in the care of the Toronto Humane Society. So that's why the Toronto Humane Society, we have humane societies that care for animals. That's the origin of it. Others were involved with him in the creation of the Children's Aid Societies, but his presumption was that within a society which is predominantly Christian, that people would understand that part of their responsibility as Christians was to care for the vulnerable children in their midst. And you could assume that we could create a society of interested people from the communities that would then look at ways in which they could care for the children in their communities. He never actually thought that it would become a government-sponsored society. Social worker hadn't been invented. It would be 50 years before U of T would be granting social work degrees. So this was seen to be a lay thing based on the premise that Christian people would understand the responsibility. So he wrote, "We would like to see every Christian man and woman to see in the person of each homeless child the blessed Master pleading with him for an act of personal service. You may not be wealthy, but are you so poor that you cannot give affection to a trusting and loving little heart? God will surely bless those who from pure motives seek to serve him through these children." Again, the presumption was that there was a worldview at play, an understanding that part of our responsibility, part of our response to God's love for us is to love God's creatures, love everyone, care for the vulnerable, and that would be the kind of the impetus behind setting up a society. He became the head of the Toronto Children's Aid Society, and then later was asked by the province to set up Children's Aid Societies across the province. So at one point we had 51 Children's Aid Societies. So back then was a good thing, right? You needed to, each community dealing with their own. The problem now is that they're all still, there's 49 now, but they're still independent, right? And they don't necessarily talk to one another. They have an Ontario Association. But again, we may be adopt ready in our CAS, but our CAS may not share our name or profile with the CAS beside, right? And so there's still problems, and that's why that Jeffrey Baldwin inquest is looking for some better communication between this. What Krish is talking about and what we're encouraging in others is can we develop more of an adoptive worldview? You've heard of theology, and there's more to say on the theology. But again, we need to be careful how we perceive kids in care, kids who are needing a home. Again, they're not those children, they're God's children. They're our neighbors who we're called to care for. This was really impressed upon Tracy and I, and we actually, when we were before we were engaged, we were talking about our expectations of family, and both of us envisioned an adoptive family. That was just kind of the starting point for both of us. So we always thought we would adopt, and we did. But it wasn't, in terms of being more of an advocate, it wasn't until our daughter Lauren was in kindergarten and 5 years old and came home one day and said, "Mom, you need to write a book about adoption. There's too many stupid, mean kids who don't understand God's love." And in her kindergarten, and we write about that in this, there's copies of it back there, but, and basically, the kids in her kindergarten class did not know she was adopted, but the theme of adoption came up, and all she heard was a lot of negative, pejorative things being said. Another time she's in class, and the issue of adoption came up, and the kid said, "Oh, I adopted a turtle at the zoo. Is that the same thing?" And the teacher really didn't have a good response, right? So there is a stigma. Krish mentioned, I'll reinforce it again, in terms of the word orphan. They're the unwashed, the unwanted, the damaged goods, the stories from the 1800s about the orphanages and second-class citizens. Actually, there was a professor from Emory who wrote a paper years ago. I'm trying to track it down, but I took notes during his lecture. And he had, up until the mid-1800s, there was a theology at play within a lot of, in North America, that if a child was orphaned, so both their parents were killed, then in a sense that was their fate. That was their predestined to then live without parents. And so we placed them in orphanages. And then a new movement emerged, the different theology saying, wait just a minute, are they fated then to be in orphanages, or is this just an opportunity for other families to open up their homes and to adopt? And so there was this shift in how we responded to the needs. But again, the reality is the word orphan certainly applies overseas in many situations. But in Canada, just remember that technically orphan means that both parents are dead. That's not the case in the vast majority of these 30,000 kids we're talking about. Part of their reality is that their birth parents are alive, and for most of them, they remember their birth family. They've engaged with them. They've been probably separated. They become crown wards. They become legal, children of the state, of the province, because ongoing connection with their family was not healthy for them, right? But the reality is they do have, their parents are alive, and that's part of their journey and part of their experience. And so we need to be careful. And also, the Greek is orphan, James 1:27. The Hebrew root word that the Greek is translated from is fatherless. And if we think about fatherlessness rather than orphan, then your circle gets much, much broader. If we think in terms of how many kids in our society are growing up fatherless, as opposed to without parents. And for many kids, there's males in the home, but there's not really a father kind of engaged in their life. So you broaden that, and also when you think of this morning, Isaiah, alien, widow, fatherless, there's the stranger, and what's the one other? There's 5 that recur in the Old Testament, and all these are people who wouldn't have status within society. All of them would not have someone who would, in a sense, needed someone to stand and speak for them. And I think that's the thrust of Scripture too. Who are the vulnerable? Those who have no one to stand for them, those who do not have the resources to defend themselves, and so therefore require someone else. And then also, the language of a real parent. There's other languages. Catch yourself when you're engaging with the issue of adoption, but language is very important. For us, again, we refer to ourselves as not as I'm an adoptive dad necessarily, but we're an adoptive family, because when we adopted our girls, it was very much a covenantal relationship. And our one daughter was slightly older when we adopted, and so she was involved in that understanding of covenant. We actually we asked the judge if we could do this, and we actually had a wedding-like ceremony inside the courtroom when we signed off on the adoption papers, and the judge was fully supported because for us it was a covenant. As again, Chris mentioned yesterday, it's a covenanting relationship, marriage and adoption, and so it raises that status. Again, briefly in Canada. We can distinguish between public and private adoption. So when I talk about the 30,000 children who are adopt ready, they are all that would be they're in the care of public agencies, and there's been a formal separation legally between their birth parents and them. So they're now fully in the care of the state, and they are ready to be adopted. And the process of adopting those children would be going to the Children's Aid Society of Ontario, the Child and Family Services Agency, whatever, in your province. And that's kind of known more as public adoption. There are no costs. It doesn't cost anything to adopt publicly. Private adoption is, again, that's where more than likely there's a woman who is pregnant and wants to release her child to an adoptive family, and often again this comes through the relationship through church connections or through crisis pregnancy centers and so on. Groups like Jewels for Jesus and others help facilitate these private adoptions, and so there it's more likely that in that situation then if you're an adoptive family, you'd be looking to hire a lawyer. You still need to be getting a home study. So you need to find a social worker who will do a home study. So there's costs involved at that level. And then of course there's international adoption, which is kind of like a private adoption, but done overseas. There's open and closed. And so quite often with the 30,000, the public adoption side, again, the formal legal relationship has been severed between the biological parents and the child. And sometimes there's restricted communication between the child, or the communication between the child and the birth parents has been severed for the protection of the child. And so those are known to be closed adoptions. Or there's kind of minimal connection between the birth parents and the adoptive family and the child. An open adoption where there's various degrees, semi-open or open. Wendy deals with that in her workshop. Varying degrees of access and communication between the birth mom and the adoptive family and the child. And quite often, usually in private adoption situations, there's more of an openness. There's usually meetings between the adoptive or the birth mother and the adoptive family, and there's usually someone who's brokering the relationship. And so again, there's varying degrees there. And again, the typical process, and it's becoming more and more universal. It'd be nice if it became set across Canada. Typically then, if you're looking now at a public adoption process, you're interested, you go to your local Children's Aid Society or Child and Family Services. You indicate to them that you're interested in pursuing either adoption or fostering. And then they'll put you in a course in Ontario. It's called PRIDE. And it's parental information, education, development, and I forget what all the 5 letters stand for, but and it's a 9 evenings, 3 hours each evening, and you're there with respective adoptive and fostering families. You learn everything you need to know about the issue and the system and how it works. And then once you complete the course, and then if you want to pursue, then there'll be a home study. And again, a home study is usually required, whether you're adopting publicly or privately or internationally. And then you have a home study done by an approved worker or by the government agency. And then once your home study is completed, then you're kind of on the list to be adopt ready. Again, Chris mentioned it this morning, and he's going to do some this afternoon, so I'll move this quickly. We have about just over 10 minutes left, and I want to leave some time for questions and conversation. Again, developing an adoptive culture, again, you've heard from Chris, but it's a lot of, part of it's theology and part of it's practice. I know of churches that have done different things. There's one church where there's quite a few fostering families in the congregation. So when a child is placed into foster care of one of the families of the church formally recognizes it and welcomes the child into the church community. And when the child is leaving foster care and going to be adopted, they have a similar celebration, at the church during the Sunday morning service, right? To graduate the child on and to celebrate the connection. Again, everything from baby showers for adoptive moms, Mother's Day, Father's Day, recognizing all the connections and so on. So it's really just getting it in mind that adoption is just, for our daughters, it's one way that kids come to their forever home, right? And it's quite natural, and it's something that happens. Connecting with local agencies, again, I know a church in Ontario, and they hosted a supper, almost a banquet for the social workers in their area. Social workers aren't well loved. In many circumstances, they're seen as, most of them are in protection side of the business, and they were just delighted that actually somebody in the community would throw them a banquet and give them some Christmas gifts and so on. And it got so successful they actually had to move it out of the church into a local community center. But again, there's ways to connect with local agencies. What can we do to help? You saw in the video, the clip, that's the executive director of the local Children's Aid Society in our community. And everything from clothes for foster kids and to help new adoptive families, people to drive, right? If you have 2 or 3 foster kids and they're in soccer or swimming or medical appointments, who's going to help to drive them? It's just basic supports. And then again, learn to serve the families in the communities, the lone parent families, babysit, having coffee, mentoring a young mom, a whole variety of things, how we can engage in the life of the community and the life of people. So I'll just conclude quickly. Next steps, again, ask it, for yourselves or for your family. If you think you're a little old, well, maybe your children might think of adoption, or anyway, just ask the question, the adoption question, for you and your church. Adoption Sunday, the seminars, I meant Focus on Family has done some great work on seminars in churches and training for family therapists on issues that pertain to adoption and fostering transition issues and grieving issues and so on. Because again, all these kids are experiencing loss. And so there's a primary grief need to deal with. Connect with your local agencies, just call them up. If you're a local church, just call up and say, hey, we're a church and this is our demographics and this is kind of what we do. Can you come? Adoption Sunday or another event, invite a recruitment worker from the local Child and Family Services to come and just give a few words in the service and say, this is what we're looking at, this is what we need. And engage with the children in the center. Mark 9, right? It's an interesting chapter. We start with Jesus on the mount with Elijah and Moses, right? And the disciples want to build an edifice, right? And then you go in a situation where there's some healing. The disciples aren't able to heal, and they're frustrated. Why can't we heal? And Jesus heals, and they're a little frustrated with them. And so, what is our role? What's our identity? What does it mean to be a disciple? Was it, if we're not supposed to build structures and we can't heal people, what are we to do? And as the story goes on, we end up in a home in Capernaum. And Jesus, what is true leadership? Bring the child to the center of the room and embrace the child. And it's interesting, in December, a report came out from the British Columbia Representative of Children and Youth, lamenting about the $70-some million that has spent over the last number of years, and conversations about how to deal with Aboriginal children, particularly those in need in the public system and in foster care. And she was very critical of how the money was spent, and there's really no progress, a lot of talk, but she said, I don't think one child's been helped by all the money spent. And she said, the Ministry of Children Early Development must put children in the center. And so in our churches, can we envision a time when whatever decision we make corporately in churches, we think about the child first, and how do we embrace the child, put the child in the center, because in the core of that is that's what leadership is in Christ's mind. So again, adoptionsunday.com and Ask a Connect and Engage, magazines at the back. Remind you of if you want to sign up for the book, and we'll let you know when it's available. And I will stop here.